Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and today, you know what I'm bringing you? You can tell by the shirt. If you didn't already could tell by the video, we are talking about the 1970s. Hands down, the best decade for music. And obviously I'm going to get into why very, very shortly. But let me just say, I mean, the 60s really had so much innovation, but I think the 1970s has the best records. Some of the best artists. Obviously they didn't have the Beatles really, but still that doesn't matter. There's so many great groups besides the Beatles, and I think music was very much allowed to flourish in this decade. You got a lot of black artists like Marvin Gaye talking about politically charged music that was very much about black empowerment and the betterment of society. And then you get these really, really crazy soundscapes created by certain bands, which we may get into shortly, so I won't really say too much. Of course, you got the hard-hitting sound of Led Zeppelin. There's so many bands and great artists, and you know, just the great amount of singers, songwriters, you know, like Neil Young. I could go on, but obviously I'm about to get into the records that I find to be the 10 best of the 70s that I've heard so far, but really these are all 10 of the greatest records of all time. You can name off any one of these and I would say, yeah, that's one of my favorite records. So let's get right into it. But first, I'm going to put on the screen there a list of my honorable mentions. And let me tell you, there's a lot of them. What? Rumors of me? Are you crazy, man? Maybe a little bit, but let me reassure you, it was like number 11, okay? So it was like, that tells you how good the 70s, I mean, if the shirt I'm wearing, the album from the shirt I'm wearing didn't make the list, I mean, what does that say? But also, yeah, I know, Bob Dylan didn't make it again, but I assure you, Blood on the Tracks was like number 15. And I really did want to throw Desire on there as an honorable mention. It was very plausible that it could have been, but I hadn't got a chance to re-listen to it, and so unfortunately I had to keep it off. But just keep that in mind, there's an asterisk next to it. Kicking off the list right at number 10, we have Wish You Were Here by the legendary prog outfit Pink Floyd. I mean, come on, look at this album cover. One of the greatest album covers of all time, and really tells you everything you need to know about the record without having listened to it. You see the businessman shaking hands with another guy who's getting burned, which is basically, well, part of the concept of this album. Because obviously after The Dark Side of the Moon, just the massive success kind of drew Pink Floyd apart. And I guess when they were in the studio filming this, what is this, movie? So when they were recording this in the studio, they really weren't talking to each other at all. But somehow they were able to come together and create this incredibly coherent and incredibly amazing concept album. One of the best concept albums of all time. Of course, dealing with mainly the mental health issues of Syd Barrett, which was, you know, kind of skirted with on Dark Side of the Moon. But really, this album is a tribute to him, and just that hauntingly beautiful story about the guy with no eyebrows and the shaved head and the very, very kind of stocky figure coming into the studio and just wandering around with a toothbrush and like brushing his teeth, and no one knew who it was until, you know, Nick Mason, the drummer of Pink Floyd, said, "That's Syd." And just hearing the story about Roger Waters, who knew him since he was a child, and David Gilmour, who was friends with him since, you know, the beginning of their college years, just breaking down and crying, is just one of the most heartbreaking tales in rock music. But the fact that he just showed up there and you know, said, you know, obviously wasn't well, but you know, said his piece to the band, and then they never saw him again. When they were recording Shine On You Crazy Diamond, which if you look at it, it's a anagram which says Syd, or an acronym, I should say. But yeah, so this really was just one of those moments in life that is just so bizarrely coincidental, I should say, that all the stars seem to line up, and yeah, It's just a wonderful, wonderful piece of history right there. But even without the Syd Barrett story making this album, just the songs themselves, Shine On You Crazy Diamonds, well, the first 5 parts, is my favorite Pink Floyd song of all time. And the thing that's so incredible about it, I believe it's like 18 minutes or so. And usually with, you know, jazz instrumentals, I love jazz, but, you know, when they go on so long, I just kind of like feel disengaged. It doesn't feel as focused. It feels like they're, you know, doing whatever. But here, every second just feels so enthralling, and I am engaged every single second. And of course, the way they introduce the motifs, like the Sid's theme, go down, 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 down. I mean, come on, this is brilliant. And then when David Gilmour's guitar solo on the middle of this track is one of the greatest guitar solos in history. Just that guitar tone of his, I mean, it's undeniably him. One of the best probably the best guitarist alive, if you ask me. But even so, getting into, you know, the lyrics about him, reminiscing about him when he was younger, before he became, let's say, a product of the industry, which is the other big theme of this album, as you can see by the album cover, which you get into with the chilling and cold Welcome to the Machine, with those, I don't know if it's with the synths just droning in the background, and Roger Waters will, "Welcome to the Machine," or David Gilmour in that manner, and just the panning of that sound going back and forth, sounding like a factory. I mean, it's just incredible. And, you know, obviously the title track, and of course you got to talk about first Have a Cigar, which was sung by Roy Harper, the only song in Pink Floyd's history that didn't have one of the members of the group singing on it. And he does a great job of creating that alienation, you know, this outside force who's kind of like sees them as more of a commodity as people. And then of course the beautiful title track, which has just been covered so many times at open mic nights. But man, is it good. You know, just start with just that TV, the TV kind of changing channels are in the one stereo channel, and then David Gilmour's acoustic guitar coming in on the other side, and then you hear him coming, so you think you can tell, you know, it's just so beautiful, so brilliant. And then wrapping it up with the, you know, the last 4 parts of Shine On You Crazy Diamond, which, I mean, it's a great track. I think it goes on a little too long. That's probably my only problem with this album. Because really, as far as prog goes, as far as instrumentals go, this is just amazing. And even more than that, there's so much to chew on with the concept of Syd Barrett being kind of eaten up by the music industry, as it goes for the group members as well. So it all just comes together in one of the most brilliant concept albums of all time. And at number 9 on my list, we have one of the most magnificent double albums in history, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road by Sir Elton John himself. And this, as far as I'm concerned, is Elton John's best record. It's really like a greatest hits album. I mean, come on. And I gotta talk about the opening of this album, Funeral for a Friend, Love Lies Bleeding, which I think is one of the greatest opening tracks, and what a sprawling entrance to any record. But of course, you know how it starts off as that, like a requiem, and it's just so enthralling, just hearing the synths and the keys, the organs being played. But then you get into the second half of the song, and it turns into a pop rock masterpiece. Just such a banger, and you know that, and love lies bleeding in my hand. I mean, come on, it's just so great. But look at, I mean, right after that, you have, why am I blanking on the title? Give me 1 second.
A few moments later.
Okay, I remembered. Candle in the Wind, which, I gotta be honest, I think is the greatest song Elton John and Bernie Taupin ever wrote. I mean, probably some of the best lyrics Bernie Taupin ever wrote, and kind of his tribute to Marilyn Monroe and how she was viewed by the press as just the sexual object. And yet, I mean, there's really such a tragic story to her life and how it ended up, and it's just him saying, you know, like, I feel for you, Marilyn. Or Norma Jean, as she was actually named. Brilliant song. But I mean, right after that, I mean, you got Benny and the Jets, the title track, which is another one of Elton John's best songs, Saturday Night's Alright for Fighting. I mean, the list goes on and on with this record, but even so, there's so many underrated songs that are just absolute gems in Elton's catalog, like The Song Has No Title, Gray Seal, Jamaica Jerk Off, Sweet Painted Lady, which I think is one of the most beautiful ballads in his catalog. Yet again, some of the most amazing lyrics from Bernie Taupin. But regardless, there's so, from top to bottom, Roy Rogers, Social Disease, it's like more popping in my head as soon as I'm thinking about this album. And for 90 minutes long, it never feels tiring. It's always engaging. Really, I mean, how can you knock this? This is a singer-songwriter, well, at least in this case, a singer-songwriter duo, but really an artist at the top of their craft, and really just one of the best albums ever. So, at number 8, let me just preface this by saying, there's only one artist, at least if we're talking about solo artists, that I love more than Bob Dylan. And, of course, that is Mr. Stevland Morris, aka Stevie Wonder. And at number 8, I have his record, Songs in the Key of Life. What? Number 8? You gotta be out of your damn mind. No, listen, okay? This is one of the greatest albums of all time. I'm gonna say that right there. So, the fact that it's number 8, look, still saying a lot. If we're talking about the 70s. That's how good the 70s was. But really, I mean, we're just talking about Goodbye Yellow Brick Road being one of the best double albums of all time. I don't think that there is one album that has more great songs written by a single person than on this, just masterpiece right here. And it's just incredible, like, besides, like, a couple songs that he had co-writers on, he not only wrote all these songs, but he also performed multiple instruments, sang on all the tracks. And when we're talking about multiple instruments, he played the synths, he played the harpeggi, I believe it's called, he played the drums, which I always say he is one of the most underrated and most talented drummers in history. And he composed it and everything, and he's blind. So it's like, what excuse do you have? But really, I mean, just starting off with that opening track, that kind of his ode to the old gospel stations with that chord, with that harmony coming in, and then him just saying, "Good morning or evening, friends, here's your friendly announcer," and him just bringing I have a message to pass on to everybody, and just him sending his message of love. Love is in need of love today. I mean, what a timeless message to send. And I think it's such a great introduction to the themes and the ideas that he's exploring on this album with such musical complexity and lyrical complexity. I mean, there's no way. I mean, Stevie Wonder is like top 5 songwriters of all time. There's no way. His musical chops, because I was saying this about Brian Wilson, he's probably the greatest composer in popular music. Stevie Wonder kind of gives him a run for his money. I mean, just listen to the chord progressions on here, and just the way that everything is arranged, especially on one of my favorite songs, because there's so many great songs on here, I don't have to tell you that. So I'm only going to go over the highlights, which really is saying like some of the greatest songs of all time. There's probably like 4 songs on here that are my top 50 favorite songs of all time. But really, if you talk about the amount of key modulations on this album, you're probably looking at like in the thousands. Just kidding, it's probably in the 500s. But still, I mean, really, just listen to the composition on Knocks Me Off My Feet, which I know isn't one of the big singles from the album, but really one of the most beautiful ballads ever written. And just the way, I mean, that middle 8 is one of the most brilliant middle 8s ever, There's something about your love. And then once he breaks into that chorus and just soars, it's absolutely just that, I don't want to bore you with it. I mean, it is just so beautiful. And just lines like, we lay beneath the stars under the lover's tree that is seen through the eyes of my mind. I mean, what a beautiful way of, you know, kind of talking about his blindness not being a obstacle, but, you know, kind of his inner visions, if you will, forgive the pun. It's just such a beautiful sentiment. I really absolutely love that song. But then you have like some of the biggest hits of all time, like Sir Duke. As soon as you hear that horn riff at the beginning, you're like, oh man, yes, one of the catchiest, grooviest songs of all time. And then to get I Wish right after that, which is another classic Stevie Wonder song that everybody knows, or at least everybody should know. I mean, come on. Just talk about him moving all over the map. And then there's songs like Pastime Paradise, which I am ashamed I did not realize was written by Stevie Wonder, and knew it was a Coolio song from the 90s, so I'm really mad at myself for that. But really, just the way he'll use words, not necessarily alliteration, but the way he makes it so so coherent, linking all these similar sounding words like that rhyme together. Dissipation, immigration, you know, and he makes a cohesive statement out of that, which is what I love so much. Or when it comes to one of the great songs on here, Ordinary Pain, where you get the usual typical love song, the heartbreak ballad coming from the man, but then when it goes to the second half, it completely transforms into a different song, and it's from the female perspective and how she was done dirty, and you really get a multifaceted picture of this relationship that has failed. And of course, a lot of these songs are very uplifting, but especially with Pastime Paradise, there is some social critique on here, which Stevie Wonder was always known for. I mean, one of the greatest political songwriters of all time. And just listen to Village Ghetto Land, which the best way I can describe it is like Baroque synth. I mean, it is just so chilling juxtaposed against those haunting lyrics that just get me every time. It is one of the most brilliantly composed songs and executed songs ever. But really, I mean, so many. Isn't She Lovely is one of my top 10 favorite songs of all time, and one of the greatest songs a parent has ever written to their child. And just hearing Baby Aisha in the sink or eating food, I mean, just him basking in the loveliness that is his child, and just the joy of him being a father, it just burst through this album. Especially, I mean, such a great and fitting song for an album called Songs in the Key of Life. Such a celebration of life, and nothing epitomizes that or Stevie Wonder more than As, which is my favorite Stevie Wonder song of all time. And yeah, I like that more than Isn't She Lovely, right? So that's saying a lot right there. But just, you know, breaking into that chorus, that gospel build, until the rainbows burn the star in the sky, you know, just, and then by the end of the track, just him howling his vocals about, you know, how the world is going to change and we're going to make it a better place and for the ones we love. I mean, absolutely beautiful, and just what a beautiful record. I mean, really, this might be the greatest double album of all time as far as I'm concerned. I mean, from top to bottom, this thing is like over 140 minutes long, and besides, my only problem with it is it's great that he included extra songs, but I feel like after Another Star, it's kind of like, okay, it's a little overkill. Not that the songs are bad. There's a couple of great songs on there like Ebony Eyes, but you know, it goes on a little too long, and they just don't hold up quite as well to the other songs on here. But really, how can you knock this? It's always on the list of the greatest albums of all time, and it's not hard to see why after listening to this. And really, proof, if you need any further proof, that Stevie Wonder is probably the greatest musician alive. Okay, guys, at number 7 I have Berlin by Lou Reed, which really epitomizes everything that's terrible about the world and everything that's terrible about humanity, and is like the most depressing record ever recorded. So yeah, very, very uplifting number 7. But really, I mean, there aren't many albums that affect me so emotionally like this one. I mean, this is a devastating piece of work, And really, I mean, further proof, if you need to know, that Lou Reed, I mean, I think his solo albums are even better than the Velvet Underground records, which I absolutely love. But really this, I mean, reusing the title track from his debut album, it was such a better call on here, setting us into the setting of the war-torn Berlin, and the story of Jim and Caroline, a very, very lovely couple who have very, very toxic, well, I think toxic is putting it lightly, relationship habits that end up being the demise of... I don't want to give the album away, but listen, I mean, this really... Whew, I can't stress it enough how depressing this album is, but if you stick with it, and you even stick with Lou Reed's voice, which I know not everybody is huge on, but I think it's great. It works for what he needed to do. I mean, just listen to Caroline Says To, or The Kids. I mean, especially The Kids is, oh my god, just thinking about it, it is just horrifying. And just the story of Jim, who's just this absolute sociopath. Really, a character study. I mean, this is an album, it's a character study. When do you ever get that? What, are we talking about Taxi Driver or something? No, we're talking about Lou Reed's Berlin that came out in 1973. And still, before Taxi Driver, we had this. And really, obviously it's not the same thing, but you get what I mean. Just what a beautiful display of the sheer and utter hopelessness and despair that humanity sometimes give. Yeah, it's it's one of the most brilliant concept albums yet again. I mean, what else do I have to say about this? Give it a listen to yourself if you're willing to put yourself in the gutter for like 2 hours afterwards, but really, you'll be speechless, and it's absolutely worth it. Alright guys, I'm going to give you something a little more uplifting for my number 6. And at number 6, I have Bridge Over Troubled Water by Simon and Garfunkel. Now, obviously, they didn't make my 60s list, but here they are. And we were just talking about Stevie Wonder being one of the greatest songwriters of all time. Paul Simon, I mean, you can't knock him. He's written so many classics in the American songwriting book. But really, this is everything. This epitomizes everything great about this duo and everything great about Paul Simon as a songwriter, especially the title track, which, I mean, obviously is one of the most legendary songs of all time, and the fact that they weren't going to use that as the single, and the fact that Paul Simon gave it to Art Garfunkel to sing, and just the sincerity and the pureness of Art Garfunkel's angelic voice on this track, giving that gospel feel that this song was going for. It's just one of the most beautiful performances on any record, and I think Art Garfunkel's best performance on any record, especially when it comes to them, and shows that he is the stronger vocalist of this group. But really, just what a beautiful song, you know, Like a Bridge Over Troubled Water, I Will Lay Me Down. I mean, it is just what a wonderful tribute to friendship and being there for someone and giving your all to help another fellow friend or someone you care about. I mean, really, it is just beautiful, beautiful song. But even so, you have a lot of... Like, El Condor Pasa was really the first time that you could kind of see Paul Simon experimenting with other, you know, types of world music. Obviously, he would go to explore further in Graceland in the 80s, but really it started here. And then, of course, Cecilia, which he knew that was going to be a hit, but because he thought that should have been the lead single. And he was right about it being a hit, despite the, you know, overtowering success of the title track. But really, what a fun song. You just can't help but love it when you're hearing it. And then, of course, you have other great songs, underrated gems like Keep the Customer Satisfied, Baby Driver, which was I knew before and was used so great in the film of the same name. If you haven't checked it out, which I'm sure most of you have seen it. But even so, there's just one song after another. So long, Frank Lloyd Wright was kind of like a dip into bossa nova. There's so many different styles present on this album, whether it be, you know, like Peruvian music or bossa nova or gospel. I mean, the list goes on and on. But really, I mean, another definitive achievement by Paul Simon in the songwriting department is The Boxer, which is obviously semi-autobiographical. And of course, I mean, I have to bring him up again because every chance I get, I have to talk about him. Hal Blaine, the most legendary session musician of all time, especially the best session drummer in history, coming on this thing and hitting that snare shot, which apparently at the elevator Columbia Studios in New York sounded like a cannon going off. It's that powerful, but really as soon as you hear it, you know you're in for The Boxer. And just that lie la lie, lie la lie 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 la lie. I mean, it's one of the catchiest choruses of all time. And that's the thing in this album. It's so memorable because it's so catchy and just so timeless. But really, I mean, just look at these two, the most iconic duo of all time, also the best. And really, as their send-off record, I mean, there aren't really any final albums that get better than this besides Abbey Road. So really just deserves all the praise it gets. And yeah, this is only at number 6. So what else is to come after this? Yes! We've made it to the top 5 of the 70s. Woo! Alright, number 5. I'm so excited to talk about this one. I've been wanting to talk about it on my channel for a long time. Transformer by Lou Reed. Further proof, if you don't think that Lou Reed was like the most transgressive songwriter in the history of popular music, here it is. First off, I just want to say that Lou Reed is one of my favorite artists of all time. He's one of my top 5 favorite artists. I'd put him up there with Dylan and all that. And really, if you listen to some of his lyricism, I mean, his way of creating these abstract lyrics really kind of rivals Dylan in some sense. I mean, just listen to this line on Andy's chest, alright? Hold on. But the funny thing is what happened to her nose. Oh, it grew until it reached all her toes. Now when people say her feet smell, they mean her nose. I mean, what? It is so wild. But really, I mean, that's just a taste of what you get in this album. You get, and really, I mean, at the time, 1972, this album came out, he was talking about, like, transvestites and transgender women and homosexuality. No one was really talking or even dare to talk about this stuff. And that's what I love about Lou Reed so much, is not only what he was talking about, but the way he did it was so great. I mean, of course, Walk on the Wild Side is one of the best songs Lou Reed ever wrote in his life, and probably his most iconic song, with just that iconic Lou Reed vocal delivery. Was like, hey babe, take a walk on the wild side, you know. And it really, it's just his sense of sardonic wit is just so great throughout this entire thing. And then of course just that chorus, and all the colored girls go do 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 do. I mean, just wow, what a great classic song. And the walking bass line, I mean, it's like the best bass line, at least acoustic bass line in history. I mean, no question. But even so, you have heartbreaking ballads like Perfect Day, which really starts off the first, well, not starts off the first side, but to have it on the first side, it really adds a great diversity to this record. And it's just one of the most beautiful and heartbreaking ballads of, you know, being accepted by someone else but not being able to accept yourself as a human being, whether it be the transgressions that you have done, or just, you know, trying to get some sort of self-confidence to understand why you're special. I mean, it is just beautiful song. But even so, I mean, there's so many glam rock classics on here, like Satellite of Love, which has vocals from Bowie, which I know, you know, obviously he worked on this album. And I mean, it's all the better for having Bowie on there. But even so, songs like Hanging Around is such another one of those surrealist songs that just, the humor is just so on point. And that's what you get, his sardonic sense of wit throughout this entire record. And of course, I mean, some of these songs are complete, utter camp, like New York telephone conversation, but it's just so enjoyable. I mean, I absolutely love it. And then the last track on here, Good Night Ladies, just you could just picture Lou Reed at a burlesque bar, like in drag on stage, and like just singing off to this crowd. I mean, it is so funny, and his delivery is just absolutely hysterical on here. It's an absolute hoot of a track. But really, I mean, yeah, I mean, what can you say about this? It's so groundbreaking in so many ways, and just the stuff that he was saying. I mean, just listen to what he's saying on Makeup. We're coming out of our closets onto the street. I don't think he really paints between the line there. It's pretty obvious what he's talking about, and really, I mean, the fact that this was a hit showed that everybody was a hypocrite, but even so, I mean, how can you not love this album? It is one of the greatest records ever, and just from top to bottom, I love almost every single track on here. Yeah, an absolute classic, and to me, the best glam rock album of all time. Sorry, David. What can I say? And at number 4 on my list, I have an album from probably my favorite band after the Beatles. So I think that says a lot right there. And some of you might know who this band is. Some of you may not, who are just tuning into this channel. But the album I'm talking about, I think, is their greatest achievement. And really, this is quite close to cracking my top 10 albums of all time. I'll just get into it. Who's Next by The Who. I mean, really, just one of those albums, just pure rock and roll all the way through, with just incredible musicianship to boot. Just starting off with Baba O'Reilly, which as soon as you hear that synth arpeggio, you know what it is. You know it's, and then you hear that opening guitar chord and guitar from Pete Townsend, and you know that this is one of the best songs, best rock songs ever. And obviously, you know, the whole story behind the album, where the abandoned Lifehouse project, where Pete Townsend wanted to create this vast picture of this desolate landscape, as you hear in the Bob O'Reilly Teenage Wasteland, and how he eventually wanted to do some live recording with the audience, you know, joining in on the album. Very ambitious, but obviously fell apart. But instead we got one of the most straightforward, one of the best rock records of all time, with so many heavy hitters on here, and obviously Baba O'Reilly is just one of them. But Bargain, I think, is even better, and honestly one of my favorite Who songs, really, besides one other song that's actually on this album, which I'll get to later. But really, just listen to the musicianship. This is a band in absolute peak form. Really, I think technically, if we're talking about musicianship, the greatest band of all time. And part of that has to do, at least on this song, with Keith Moon's drum playing. Oh my goodness, was he a beast on the kit. And really, just the drum solo near the end of this track, where he's just going, I mean, really, it just blows my mind how anybody was able to go that fast. I mean, he was a little guy, but he was like an octopus or something, being able to like hit everything at once with such precision. But I do think, as manic as some of his earlier playing was, this feels the most controlled, and really, I think his most refined drumming in his entire career. But that's not to slouch on anybody else. I mean, especially on Bargain, I think epitomizes just how great all the members are. John Entwistle's bass line on here is just incredible, and another reason why he is the greatest bass player of all time, no question. And I would also throw Keith Moon in as the greatest drummer of all time in my book. But just Roger's vocals have never been better, and just that breakdown in the middle with Pete Townsend. I sit looking round, I look in my face in the mirror. I know I'm worth nothing without you. And then John Wessels' bass line underneath. I mean, it's just incredible. And then you got other great songs on here. The simple beauty of Love Ain't for Keeping. And even the John Entwistle pen track, My Wife, which is just hilarious, about this guy's wife, after being out for a long night, she thinks he's cheating on her, and so she's going to go crazy. He has to get a judo expert with a machine gun. I mean, it's just so funny. And the one song that wasn't from the Lighthouse sessions, but even so, you have other iconic classics like Behind Blue Eyes, which was famously covered by Limp Bizkit. But really, this is the best version here. Just the no one knows what it's like to be the bad man. I mean, really, it's like, how do you not love that song? Really, there's so many. Getting in Tune is another great one. But really, to me, I'd say the definitive Who song, I think the definitive rock and roll song, if we're just talking about pure adrenaline, pure expertise playing-wise, I have to go with Won't Get Fooled Again. I mean, this is probably one of my top 5 favorite songs of all time. I think the Who's definitive statement, and really, I mean, how can you not love the song, whether it be that opening synth intro from Pete Townsend, or I believe maybe Nicky Hopkins played on it. I'll have to double check. But even so, I mean, it's just so iconic. And then that statement, I tip my head to the new Constitution. And really, I think the finale of this track, though, where Keith Moon is just wailing on the drums and everything keeps building, and then Roger Daltrey, not once, but twice on this song, lets out a primal scream, but the second one, when he lets out that scream, that is the greatest moment in rock and roll. The peak of rock and roll. And this album just does everything you want out of a rock record. Great lyrics, great performance, and really, how can you not be pumped after listening to that song? It is just an absolute banger, and there's a reason that Roger Daltrey is like killing his voice and is performing it at every concert, because it is that good. I know the Who are sick of it, but really, Pete Townsend should be proud that he came up with a song that good, and the fact that the Who made an album this good. They've made great records before, they made great records after, but nothing ever even touches this. I mean, just an absolute milestone in rock music. And now we are moving into the top 3, and also 3 of my top 10 favorite albums of all time. Yeah, sure, it's not quite as good as, you know, the number of entries I had from the 60s, but I don't think that matters, because you'll see what's at the top. I mean, this is just an incredible decade for music, and really, I mean, an incredible decade for singer-songwriters like Mr. William Martin Joel with 1977's The Stranger. Yeah, I mean, yet again, another album that just plays like a greatest hits record. One song after the next is just an absolute classic. Staples of classic rock radio, or just radio in general. And just starting with Movin' Out, which has that beautiful drum line from Liberty DeVito underneath that. Bum, 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 boom. I mean, it's just such a classic song, and just that staccato vocal that Billy Joel does on the chorus. Cruising with a crazy mama, you ought to know by now. I mean, just wow, wow, wow. Great song, and yet one after the next, because right after that you have the title track, which is brilliant with that whistling. I mean, it just kind of brings, you know, the theme and a musical motif in the album, if you will. Great song in itself. And then of course you have ballads like Just the Way You Are and She's Always a Woman, which you kind of feel like a natural extension of each other, but really just so beautiful. I mean, no one, well, maybe a few people, but really, I mean, just listen to this record, it's like, wow. I mean, he had such a sense for balladry writing back in the day when he was pumping out hits left and right. And of course, Vienna is another iconic Billy Joel song, which sometimes I feel goes underrated. And Only the Good Die Young is just an absolute radio classic, and just, you know, very, very risque for the time, you know, kind of challenging Catholicism and the premarital sort of purity that went along with it. But a great track, just an absolute classic. And of course, I mean, one after the next, really, but to me, Scenes from an Italian Restaurant, yet again, one of my top 10 favorite songs of all time. It's a beautiful painting, just the multifaceted parts in it. It feels like a journey in the same way Bohemian Rhapsody does, and it's just telling, you know, him catching up with this girl, which presumably had a relationship with the high school, them catching up about, you know, each other's lives, and then it goes into the story of Brenda and Eddie, who they knew from back in the day, and just kind of chronicling their marriage, and just the way that it brings the song back around to such epic proportions with that, I'll meet you anytime you want at our Italian restaurant. I mean, wow. I mean, how can you not love this song? How can you not love this album? It's so good that it just defies all description. How can someone write this many great pop songs? I don't know. Ask Billy Joel. And still, after all these years, he's still going strong. You just saw him back in August, and it was a great experience, even if he played the songs a little straight as opposed to how they are on the record. I mean, still hearing him at 72 years old still sound this good. It's just incredible, and I don't think it really gets any better than this. Okay, getting into the top 2 of this 1970s albums. At number 2, let me just get this right out of the way. These 2 albums are 2 of my 4 10 out of 10 records, perfect albums, along with Abbey Road, which I was talking about in the last episode. And it, I think, just goes to show you how great the 70s really were. And they're both from the same year, 1973, which I think, hands down, is the best year in music. I mean, look at how many records from this list are from that year. Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, Berlin. That's just a couple of great albums. And then here are some more. And look, I tried to make this list diverse, I know. But we already had Lou Reed on here twice. So who's next? Okay, please forgive me for that. But at number 2, and if you guys know me, you know what's coming. At number 2, I have Innervisions by Stevie Wonder. And really, I think, as much as people claim Songs in the Key of Life for being his best album, I think that this is his definitive statement. Because not only is it more compact and compartmentalized, but every song on here is amazing. And even the one that is probably the weakest on here is still great. That's how wonderful this album is, but really so groundbreaking. The way he innovated with that clavinet sound and the Tonto synthesizer, which was just so groundbreaking for its time. I mean, Stevie Wonder basically pioneered contemporary R&B music, and I think was probably the most influential artist to come after the Beatles, no question about it. And just starting off with, because I've listened to all of Stevie Wonder's records, even like Little Stevie Wonder, that's where I began. And I mean, wow, them trying to pass him off as like a child version of Ray Charles. I mean, it didn't really work, but as you can see, he was so much more than that. And, you know, all the songs are very light. So to start off with this album with Too High, I mean, this is like the darkest song Stevie Wonder had done up to this point, and it just set me on edge, you know, as soon as I heard it, in a good way. And the first time I heard this album, I'll just put it in a context, was actually when the whole George Floyd thing happened. And I was very angry, justifiably so, as I think most people were. And when I heard Visions, which is not a Stevie Wonder track people talk about as much, it is just, I was almost in tears. Because it really summarized everything I was feeling at that exact moment. A song about unity that will never be. Just that line, people hand in hand, have I lived to see the milk and honey land. It is just so heartbreaking. And when he says, you know, do I have to spread my wings and fly away to the visions of my mind? I mean, come on. That is one of the most heartbreaking and beautiful political sentiments ever, and also just laid against these really complex chord progressions with all these augmented chord. I mean, it is just insane, the musical complexity on here, especially on my favorite song on this album, though probably objectively not the best, Golden Lady. I mean, just listen to that pre-chorus. And I mean, how many times does he change keys on that thing and modulates the, you know, to see the heaven in your eyes is not so far. You start off in E flat major, and then you go, I'm not afraid to try and go it, to know the love and beauty never known before. And then he does it again. I'll leave it up to you to show it. And then he breaks into that chorus, which is so great. I mean, really, how can you create something so musically complex, but something so melodic and so memorable? It blows my mind how he did it, but he did it here. And of course, I mean, got to talk about so many great songs in here. Obviously, Higher Ground, which is the most funky song about reincarnation you'll ever hear in your life. You got All in Love is Fair, which is another beautiful, beautiful ballad about, you know, the unforeseen nature of relationships. And also, you got Don't You Worry About It Thing with that Latin, just that pure Latin flavor throughout the entire track with that beautiful groove, and Stevie trying to impress the girl in Spanish at the beginning. It's so fun. And he's Mr. Know-It-All, which is another political statement, this time talking about Tricky Dick himself, Mr. Richard Nixon. And of course, you got to talk about Living for the City, because you'd be remiss not to. I think it is like the greatest political song of all time. And it feels so cinematic in scope, which is what makes Stevie Wonder such an incredible songwriter. Because not only is he able to paint this vivid picture of racial inequality, but he also sets up this character coming from this tough background. And, you know, that line is just searing. Every time I listen to it, it's like, to find a job is like a haystack needle, because where he lives they don't use colored people. I mean, oh my goodness, come on, just a scathing, scathing, scathing song. And then of course the skit at the end where he goes to New York City and gets arrested on a drug charge that was planted on. I mean, really, you hear the anger in his voice at the end of this track, and just the way he harmonizes himself on the chord. They're living just enough, you know. I mean, come on. This, yet again, I mean, he's doing most of the playing on here except the guitars. I mean, really, this guy is such a genius. And I think when it comes to influence, I mean, really, how can you top Stevie Wonder? I mean, he basically, as I said, he invented contemporary R&B music, and I think the world is all better for it, because whatever Marvin Gaye was doing on What's Going On, which obviously you saw is on my honorable mentions, a great album, a classic seminal album in its own right, I think Stevie Wonder took and ran with it. And not only that, there's so much diversity on here. There's love songs, there's songs about drug addiction. I mean, the list goes on. But it really shows that this man can do it all, and really just a perfect album, and I don't say that very often. Okay, so you're probably thinking, Nathaniel, didn't you just say like Stevie Wonder is the greatest artist of all time? Yes, so it's like, why is he not, you know, besides the Beatles, obviously, why is he not number one? Well, there's one album, because obviously Innervisions, it's not really a concept album per se, but all the songs flow seamlessly into one another. There's one album, along with Abbey Road, that is just so cohesive, so complex. It just blows my mind that music can even be that good. And I think if you know anything about the 70s, if you know anything what I said about 1973, you know what album came out that year. And I'm sure you probably heard it, because who hasn't heard this album? And of course, I am talking about Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon. And look, I mean, I think Pink Floyd was really that band who took the torch from the Beatles when it came to production and really being innovative. I mean, obviously you had Stevie Wonder in the R&B realm, but when it came to rock music, Pink Floyd was the one who took the album format. You know, what the Beatles did on Sgt. Pepper, or what the Beatles did, you know, just on Abbey Road when we're talking about musical complexity, and made it even better here, because, as I said in the last video, you could argue the merits of Sgt. Pepper as a concept album. You cannot argue the merits of this as a concept album. And the thing is, the sonic soundscape that they create is just mind-blowing. And just to start off, it was Speak to Me with that heartbeat, you know, indicating the beginning of this life, to Breathe in the Air, which has that beautiful, beautiful David Gilmour guitar tone just ringing throughout the whole track, and getting these lyrics kind of setting, you know, off this person into the life that they will soon embark on. And then you go into On the Run, which is just so anxiety-ridden, which kind of reflects Roger Waters' anxiety of flying. And then into Great Gig in the Sky, which contains one of the greatest vocal performances ever from Claire Torrey. It's just so mind-blowing, so revelatory. It really just makes my brain melt every time I listen to it. And then Time, which, you know, arguably you could say that's the best Pink Floyd song of all time too, and I wouldn't argue, tying those motifs back in from Breathe in the Air throughout, and also the alarm clocks going off is probably the scariest moment and most startling moment on any record in history. And then of course you flip to side 2, you have Money, which is so great. You hear that boom, 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 you know, that bass line from Roger Waters, and the cash registers opening and closing kind of looped. I mean, really such a timeless classic. And then you get that David Gilmour guitar solo. I cannot stress it enough. David Gilmour. How can you not say he's like the greatest guitarist alive? Whether you like Pink Floyd or not, you gotta admit, the man has the chops, and he really delivers on this track. And then it goes into Us and Them, which I think is one of my, probably after Shine On You Crazy Diamonds parts 1 through 5, is my favorite Pink Floyd song. It's so subversive musically. The chord progression is just so surprising. Even today I hear it. It blows my mind the dimensions they were able to pull out of it. You know, Us and Them, after all, we're only ordinary men. And you could read into it many other ways. You could be seeing the division between the government and the civilians, or, you know, warring countries. You know, after all, we're ordinary men just fighting in a war. Either way you want to read it, it's valid. And even Any Color You Like, it's not the best song in there. It doesn't necessarily fit in the album quite there, but it's great. Richard Wright really going crazy on synths. Doesn't get enough credit for his work with Floyd. And then, of course, you have the 2-piece outro of Brain Damage and Eclipse. And that was really the first time they started talking about Syd Barrett and really mental health issues in general on any record, because no one was really talking about it. But he had that beautiful, the lunatic is on the grass. I mean, oh my god. And then I believe the guy who's laughing, which is I think Naomi Watts' his father on there. It's just so chilling. And then just to go into that last part of Eclipse, you know, and if the dam breaks open 20 years too soon, we'll see you on the dark side of the moon. And just that heartbeat to close it out, to bring the end of this life. This whole concept album about, you know, not letting life pass you by, you know, making the most of it, trying to be a good human being. You know, we all have our issues, but at the end of the day, we all can just try to be human. And I think this is what this album epitomizes perfectly. As it's so beautifully said on the album, there's no dark side of the moon, really. But this is the dark side of the moon that we all know and love. Well, maybe not all of us, but most of us. And I think one of the most perfect albums in history. It's amazing. So that's it, guys. Man, this conversation, I mean, I don't know how long this video is going to be, but it flew by so fast just talking about it. I absolutely love the 70s, and while there's going to be some great records after this in these upcoming decades, I really don't think it gets better than this, especially Innervisions and the Dark Side of the Moon. I mean, come on. But hey, thank you guys for tuning in. I'm loving doing this. And especially this episode, I was just so excited for, as I hope you can tell. And if you like this video, you like what I'm doing, smash that like button, subscribe to my channel, really helps me out. And speaking of 70s, I'm going to be bringing you a review of a film that takes place in the San Fernando Valley, early 1970s, Of course, I'm talking about Paul Thomas Anderson's Licorice Pizza. Be sure to be on the lookout for that. But in the meantime, you guys have a great week. And I'm going to bring you my list for the best albums of the 1980s very soon to you. So be on the lookout. We'll see you soon.
People